So I wanted to talk about my Ancestry DNA results. So pretty much I did the Ancestry DNA test about a year ago. It took several times to get somebody to help me to figure out, to decipher the results of the DNA test. So you have a maternal side, which is your mother. You have a paternal side, which is your father. So finally, after about 6 months went by, a lot of research on the internet for family history, using the DNA results. So you get DNA results. I had a second cousin, which could have been a first cousin, could have been a half sister. So I contacted that cousin match and told her that it's a possibility she could be my sibling. So she went ahead in the kindness of her heart and she did an Ancestry DNA test. It came back, it matched her at a second cousin, a first cousin once removed. Using that results, it traced her grandmother, which at one point we thought might be my grandmother. So anyway, after doing some research, it was her grandmother had two sisters. And those two sisters, one of those two sisters was my grandmother. And so how do we research this? We search from that cousin, her grandmother, to her sisters, two sisters, and one of those two sisters was my grandmother. So then you start from that, you find out which sister is most likely your grandmother, and then you follow the research backwards to find your father. So we found the two sisters, did the census records, found out she had one child, the one possible grandmother. When I was conceived, that child would have been around 12 or 13, which that left out that woman, that left her out of the possibility of being my grandmother. Then the cousin, that was not my grandmother. So then the one that was my grandmother, we started to find out who her children were, to try to research her children and go backwards towards me. So in the census records, it showed she had a son and a daughter. Long story short, somehow or another, one of the sons was not listed in the census records, and because he was in the census records he was living with his uncle and aunt at one time when the census was taken. So the census records only showed my grandmother had a son and a daughter. The daughter passed away at the age of 15 or 16, leaving the one son. The one son's name was David. I researched David. David died at the age of 18. So with no other possibilities, the Ancestry people told me, unless there's another son, that the DNA connects to him. It connects to one of this lady's sons, Ruth. Her name was Ruth. And it connects to one of her sons. And she only had one son in the census records. Okay. So I went along with, okay, well, it's over with. My father's passed away. And I wanted to pay my respects. I found out he was 2,400 miles away in Boise, Idaho. So I planned to go there to the gravesite. I wanted to go to the hospital where my aunt was buried, just to pay my respects. Find my grandparents, same thing, pay my respects, and close everything. Something told me, call the graveyard. A little voice, call the graveyard. Okay, so I called the graveyard where my aunt and supposedly father was buried. So the guy told me that, well, your father's here, but your aunt's not here. And that was because she was buried at where the hospital was in those days. So, but he says to me, but there's a lady that when she passes away, it's already planned, she's gonna be buried here. Okay? Where your dad is. I thought that was kind of unusual, but who's this woman? So out of respect, I'm not going to say her name. She's still living. So anyway, he tells me her name. I hang up the phone that quick. I do a Google search, and I find her in Boise, Idaho. So who's this woman? I don't know. So I call her up, and I say, well, so-and-so may be my father. And when I called the graveyard where he's at, they said that when you pass away, that you'll be, the plan was you will be buried there. And she said that's correct. So anyway, she says to me that the guy, David, is her brother-in-law. So I'm thinking, how could it be her brother-in-law? Because my dad didn't have a brother on the census, so it was only a son and a daughter. And it still didn't connect in my mind. So I'm like, wow, I got an aunt, I got an uncle. Then she tells me I have 3 cousins. She has 3 daughters. So I asked, well, where is my uncle? I'd like to, speak to. I'm really excited. I got a living relative. Still didn't connect. She said, well, we don't get along. He don't live here. He lives in the VA home. So I said, could I get his number? I'm really excited. He's my only living relative. So I get the number, I call him up, and I say, hi, Paul. My name is Rose, so-and-so. I say, your brother, David, supposedly the DNA results are saying, and the research I did is saying he's my dad, unless there's another brother. And the only research we could find was only one brother. It still did not connect in my brain. And so I'm talking to this guy, Paul, who's supposed to be my uncle. And I say, well, David might be my dad. And he's like, well, I'll be. He was like pretty excited. And, but he says to me, but David never left Boise, Idaho, ever. So how'd he get 2,400 miles away to make me? So we go on talking a little bit more. Something hits me and says, well, Paul, were you in the Army? He said, well, yes, I was. I said, well, where were you stationed? He said, Alaska. Still thousands of miles away from my home in Maryland. So I say, okay, were you stationed anywhere else? He said, well, yeah, I was in Maryland. I said, what? You were in Maryland? He said, yeah. I said, did you have a girlfriend there? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, well, what was her name? He said, Helen Morgan. Oh my God. Wait a minute. Helen Morgan was my mom. I said, Paul, you're my dad. He says, well, I'll be. So he knew of me. He knew that I was born. He didn't know if I was a girl or boy. He had been, after he left Maryland, he came to Maryland for training. He went back to Alaska, and he kept contact with my mother by mail, asked her to marry him, and then he got back to Maryland again, and he went to my grandmom's house and asked him to speak with Helen, my mom. And she said that she married another soldier had a baby, married another soldier, and moved out of state. So at that point, my father went ahead and closed the door. He left me behind, which I understand. I don't understand. I'm still very confused. So anyway, my son is like, well, he's not your father until he does a DNA test. So even though all the research and everything led me to his mom, and the research led me to him from his brother, and the truth came out, he told me that he was with my mother. He was in Maryland the same year I was born. He knew of me, just didn't know if I was a girl or boy. He never met me. Okay. So he goes ahead. My son sends him a DNA test. He does the DNA test, and I have 7 children. 4 of the children did their DNA. I did mine. When his DNA results came back, it connected to me as being my dad. It connected to my kids as being the grandfather. So that's how it happened. Never give up. I searched over 60 years for him, and I found him. Never give up. Never give up your search. And when you think one record, you think you find these records, you got a roadblock, you think, well, he's the only possibility that could be the father. Well, look what happened to me. Here, the census record said there was no other brother, there was no other children to this woman. Well, my grandma, Ruth Bancroft. And it was just the most exciting thing in my life to be able to find him. And then we planned to go out there, and then the COVID-19, the coronavirus happened, and he's in the VA home, and to this day, I've known about him now all this time, and still to this day I have not met him. We talk several times a week. He sent me a gift. He sent me a card. In the card he said he wanted me to have a keepsake from my daddy, and he got me a cross. And the card means more than any material thing, because it said from your father, Paul Bancroft. And so the day that this ancestry person was trying to decipher my DNA results, it took her 2 hours to find out 3 sets of grandparents. One was Ken Singer, which was my grandmother Ruth. She got married and became a Bancroft, but she was a Kinsinger. And so Ruth was a Kinsinger, and then Reed, and there was one more, and I don't forget. It's been a while now. So that day is the first day, just finding out from that DNA result, not having no dad, nobody, just finding out that DNA result with the cousin, her results was enough to tell me, decipher who my grandparents were, great-grandparents. It was the most exciting thing in my life. It was the first day I ever had a name. I was a Kinsinger. Now, the Kinsinger is my great-grandfather's name and my grandmother's name. So, actually, I'm a Bancroft, but that was the first day, because of those results, I was able to find out who I am. I just want to tell my story, and it's kind of weird because it came beyond the graveyard, because I wanted so bad to pay my respects and go to the graveyards to see them, to see the family. And I think they worked from beyond the grave to help me to find that clue to the woman that I thought was my aunt, was my stepmother. And the 3 women that I thought was my cousins are my biological half-sisters. So it's somewhat of a happy ending with my father. I mean, when you go out to research, you never know. Are they going to want you? Is your dad going to want you? Is other family members going to want you? Will they accept you? Because here you're not wanted all your life, and it really hurts. It's very painful for your parent to not want you. So I never thought in a million years that I'd end up finding sisters too. So at this point right now, the 3 sisters do not want anything to do with me. And out of respect, I'm not saying their names or anything about them. I talk with one, and it's over. And it does. I can't kind of swallow it that you're half of what I am and you don't want me. It's very painful. But I have to respect their decision to not want me. It's okay. And my father accepts me, accepted me in his life, and that's what I look for. That's what I want. But you got to understand too. We're talking. He's 80, going to be 84. Like after you find your daddy, you're like, oh, I'm going to be the daughter. He's going to be the daddy, and what? I mean, you weren't raised by him. You got cheated out. And the 3 sisters, they had such a good life. If you compare it to mine, they had a very protective, loving daddy. Had a good education, and I got cheated out of all that. And I grew up kind of in an abusive situation, and unloved, unwanted. I was the child that messed everything up for my mother. When I was, 25 or so, she apologized for not being able to love me. And she said she learned her lesson with the other kids she had. Okay. Well, good for you. So anyway, if you're doing your DNA and you're searching, you got to remember you're going to find out very unusual things. You might find out your father's not your father, your mother's not your mother, your siblings aren't your siblings. You might find out you're completely adopted. And DNA don't lie. DNA does not lie. When it connects to you, you can be sure that you're related to that person. And my father is my father 1,000%. And and so hopefully the coronavirus will disappear one day, and I'll be able to meet up with them. I just wanted to tell them a story because I don't want other people to give up. Do not ever give up your search. And you also have to expect that they might not want you, and the parent might not want you. They might want you, they might not want you. You have to be prepared, because it's not all what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to find my dad, and he was going to love me, and he was going to be my daddy, and it was going to make up everything, and it didn't make up everything. I have identification. I know who I am now, and I'm very proud to say I'm a Kensinger, I'm a Reed, I'm a Bancroft, I'm part of these people, and this is who my other half is, and I'm very proud of both parts of me, Morgan and the Bancroft. So don't give up your search. And every day new results come in. It might take you a year. Somebody might down the road take a test, and your DNA will be in there forever. And 20 years from now, people will still be downloading their DNA, and still results will be coming in. You never know you really never know what's going to happen. So it's a journey. Searching for my dad since I was 6 years old, it's been a journey. It's been a very painful journey. This year, what I'm telling you is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, this is the now part. You know, being raised without a dad is not a picnic. And I don't know why, but I had this desire that would not give up to find my dad. I just had to find my daddy. I had to find my daddy. I ended up getting into therapy for decades, and everything I go there, well, I want my dad. I got to find my dad. And all that didn't come possible until now, with all the DNA. And if we never did the DNA test, I would have never known. So don't give up, and be persistent, and remember the DNA is just part of it. If you get lucky to find a first cousin, you got a bingo. I mean, it's almost 101% you're going to find who your parent is if you got a first cousin. And even that is a little research. But if you have a second cousin, a third cousin, each one up, it's more research. But don't give up. If you got a third cousin, one down, it's a lot of research, but it's still all possible. And it started from me with my great-grandparent. And I since found out that my grandparents came over on to Cleveland. Or my grandmother and grandparents from my father's side came over on to Cleveland. I don't know if he was born here or if he was already here. I'm not sure, 100% sure. Came from Germany. So you got to be ready to do the research and put your time in. And it's very painful. I cried so much. I can't tell you how much I cried through this process. When I first thought that the guy David, I thought he was my father when he's really my uncle, and that he died at age 18. So 5 weeks, I'm thinking 5 weeks went by. I'm not telling you the whole story. It would take hours. But 5 weeks went by, and I thought this guy was my father, and I was grieving over him. And he was gone, and I wouldn't have the chance to meet him. It was very, very painful. And then overnight, this lady appeared. Something told me to call the graveyard. I mean, who the heck, who was it? Was it God? Was it the Holy Spirit, or what was it? I don't know. And that's when I was able, I kept saying, stop it, Rose. Don't call no graveyard, just let it go, don't torture yourself. And then it wouldn't leave me alone. It said, call the graveyard. So I called the graveyard. And that's how I found out about the lady, which is my stepmother. And that's how I found out. Boom, just like that. Found that information out, hung up the telephone, Googled it, found her, called her. In 15 minutes, I was on the phone with my biological father and didn't even know it. So don't give up, guys, gals, and remember, it could go negative, it could be positive. It's very painful. I think it's very painful either way. So good luck on your journey, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my story and my DNA results, and hopefully you will have a positive outcome, and things will go good, and you'll find out who you are and what your life is about. Take care. God bless.